She was on her knees, wiping spilled coffee off the floor, while a room full of people watched and said nothing. A 7-year-old girl pressed her face against a diner window, watching her aunt get humiliated by the most dangerous man in town. Nobody moved. Nobody breathed. Nobody dared. Then a dog growled. One low guttural sound, and every head in that diner turned toward the stranger in the corner booth, who had been sitting so still most people hadn't even noticed him. Victor Kane noticed him now. And for the first time in 3 years, Victor Kane took a step backward. If you love stories that hit like a freight train, subscribe right now, hit that like button, and drop your city and country in the comments. I want to see exactly how far this story travels. Don't go anywhere. This is only the beginning. The first thing Elena Brooks did every morning was check the locks. Not once, 3 times. Front door, deadbolt, chain, kitchen window latch. The one in Maya's room that sometimes didn't catch right unless you pressed it up and twisted hard to the left. She'd replaced the mechanism twice. It still didn't work right. She didn't have the money for a 3rd time, so she just checked it every morning, every evening, and once more before she slept. It was 4:47 a.m. when she padded barefoot down the hallway of their apartment above the hardware store on Creston Road, avoiding the board that creaked, the way she always did, because Maya was a light sleeper and any disruption sent the child into a spiral that could last hours. Elena pressed her palm against Maya's door instead of opening it, just long enough to feel the slight warmth radiating through the wood, a habit she'd developed after the first week. Some mornings that was enough. This morning, she heard Maya whimper. Elena closed her eyes, counted to 4, pushed the door open. The 7-year-old was curled at the wrong end of the bed, the way she always ended up after a nightmare, blanket twisted around her legs, her old teddy bear, a battered thing named Captain, brown fur worn thin at the ears, pressed against her chest like a shield. Maya's breathing had that shallow, rapid pattern Elena had memorized in the field years ago, doing triage in situations she never talked about anymore. Nightmare. Not a bad one. She hadn't screamed. Elena sat on the edge of the mattress, placed one hand lightly on Maya's back, and waited. That was all. She'd learned early on that speaking didn't help. Touch, stillness, presence. The breathing slowed within 2 minutes. Elena stayed 4 more anyway. In the bathroom mirror, she studied the dark circles under her eyes with the detached curiosity of someone examining a stranger. 28 years old, and she looked closer to 35 on a good day. She pulled her dark hair back, secured it with a rubber band, and didn't bother with anything else. Mascara was wasted effort in a diner kitchen that ran at 90 degrees by noon. The walk to Patty's Diner was 6 blocks. She knew every crack in every sidewalk. Blackstone Falls sat in a pocket of the Appalachian foothills that most maps seem to have forgotten about. Population, 2,200 on a generous day. 1 main road in, 1 road out, and a mountain pass that got iced over hard enough by November to make you feel like the rest of the world had simply ceased to exist. The nearest city was 40 miles and a philosophy away. It was the kind of town that had once been beautiful. Old photos in the diner showed storefronts strung with Christmas lights, families on the courthouse steps, a summer festival that packed the square with 500 people easy. Those photos were still on the walls. Nobody had taken them down. Nobody quite had the heart to, and nobody quite had the heart to look at them straight on either. The pharmaceutical plant on the eastern edge of town had closed 8 years ago. After that, everything else started closing too, in the quiet, inevitable way that a house rots when the foundation goes. Slowly at first, then suddenly, all at once. The furniture store, the pediatric clinic, both pharmacies, which was a brutal irony given what had replaced them. Victor Kane had not moved into Blackstone Falls so much as he had accumulated it. That was the word Elena always thought of, the way fog accumulated in a valley. Quiet, directionless, and then suddenly you couldn't see your own hand in front of your face. He owned the only operational gas station. He owned 3 of the remaining restaurants. He had some arrangement. No one said arrangement out loud. They said understanding, with the county sheriff, with the building inspector, with at least 2 members of the town council. His men were visible without being conspicuous, the way background radiation is present without being seen. You felt them before you identified them. A car idling a beat too long. A man at a corner who was neither arriving nor departing. People had learned. Not all at once. It took individual incidents, each one with its own quiet aftermath, its own lesson. A mechanic who filed a complaint found his garage burned to the foundation. A nurse who talked to a state inspector was found to have unpaid back taxes that somehow hadn't existed the week before. A school teacher who organized a town hall meeting relocated to her sister's house in Ohio within 2 weeks, and everyone understood without being told that this had been the wiser choice. Blackstone Falls had not surrendered to Victor Kane. It had simply, quietly, stopped fighting, the way a body stops fighting hypothermia at a certain point. Not defeat, just the body's final negotiation with impossible odds. Elena understood it. She didn't respect it, but she understood it. The Tuesday morning crowd at Patty's Diner was the usual mix of construction workers on early shifts, a table of retired men who'd been occupying the same corner booth since before Elena was born, and the rotating handful of faces she'd come to recognize as Kane's people. Not because they announced themselves, but because they ordered the same things, tipped exactly 15%, and watched the room the way people watch a room when watching the room is their job. She moved through her tables with the economical efficiency of someone who had learned early that wasted motion was wasted energy, and she didn't have energy to waste. Coffee refills before they were requested, food orders from memory, never a pad, a habit from a busier life that translated neatly to this one. She kept her eyes working, not paranoid, just aware. Another habit that didn't translate exactly, just persisted. It was 8:14 a.m. when Victor Kane walked in. She knew his arrival before she saw him. The temperature in the room changed, not literally, although it felt literal. What actually changed was the quality of attention. The retired men stopped mid-sentence. A construction worker's fork paused halfway to his mouth. The two teenagers by the window suddenly found their phone screens enormously interesting. Victor Kane was 51, lean in the way that suggested either discipline or cruelty, with a jaw that looked like it had been carved rather than grown. He dressed like money and moved like authority, which was the combination that most efficiently communicated danger. He had 2 men with him. He always had 2 men with him. They didn't come inside. They stood at the entrance, one in, one slightly behind and right, a positioning Elena recognized from protective detail protocols. Victor had clearly paid for professional instruction somewhere along the line. He took a seat at the counter, his preferred position. He could see every exit from the counter, which wasn't coincidence. Elena walked over. "Mr. Kane." "Elena." He said her name like he'd just remembered it and found it mildly interesting. "How's the little one?" She didn't react. She'd gotten very good at not reacting. "What can I get you?" "Coffee, black." He tilted his head, studying her the way a landlord studies a property he intends to purchase. "You look tired. Long shifts." He picked up the sugar dispenser, turned it in his hands, set it back down. A fidget that wasn't a fidget. "I was thinking about that corner unit above the old pharmacy building. Rent's coming due on those residential units next month. I know you've had some difficulties keeping current." Her hand was very still on her notepad. "I pay my rent." "Of course you do. You're a very responsible person." He smiled, and it was technically a smile. "I just want to make sure you feel supported. Community's important to me, especially for people in difficult situations, single women, children without parents." He let that sit for a moment. It must be hard raising a child alone. Around them, the diner was very quiet. The construction workers had stopped pretending to eat. The retired men were looking at the table. Nobody was going to say anything. Elena had known that the moment he walked in. This wasn't new information, but it still settled into her chest like something heavy and cold. She poured his coffee without her hand shaking, which was its own kind of victory. "Anything else?" Actually, he reached out and caught her wrist. Not hard. Barely any pressure at all. That was the point. "I've been meaning to ask about your sister." The whole room seemed to hold its breath. Don't, she thought. Don't do this here. Not in front of these people. Not where Maya might walk by after school. "Sophie's been gone 14 months, Elena said. Her voice was flat. She'd worked hard to make it flat. "I don't see why—" Tragic thing. He released her wrist. "Overdose, wasn't it? Such a waste." He sipped his coffee, unhurried. "Sometimes I think about how different things might have been if she'd just made better choices." Elena's pen snapped. She hadn't meant to do it. It just happened. The plastic gave under her grip and split cleanly in half, and she was standing there with two pieces of a pen in her hand, and for approximately 3 seconds she couldn't remember why that was a problem. Victor Kane looked at the broken pen. Then he looked at her. And he smiled the real smile. The one without warmth, the one that was really just information. "Careful," he said softly. "Things break so easily." He turned back to his coffee. Elena was still standing there, two pieces of pen in her fist, the breakfast rush frozen around her like a photograph, when she became aware of a sound that didn't belong. Low, controlled, a single note, a growl. She turned. Corner booth. Far end of the diner, positioned with sightlines to both the front entrance and the kitchen pass-through. She registered that positioning automatically, the part of her brain that never fully left the army noting it without being asked. A man sat there with a mug of coffee and a plate of eggs that looked like they'd been mostly ignored. He was maybe 32, 33, hard to say. Dark hair in need of a cut. A jaw that hadn't seen a razor in a few days. He wore a plain gray Henley pushed to the elbows, and on his forearms she could see the kind of tan lines you got from long deployments in high-altitude environments. A sharp boundary where sleeves had been rolled down in the field and up at the base. She clocked all of this in about 2 seconds because she'd been trained to, and the training didn't turn off. Beside him, on the floor, sat a German shepherd, not a pet. Elena had worked with military working dogs long enough to know the difference. This animal was enormous, maybe 90 pounds, with a black saddle marking that ran darker than she'd seen on most civilians, and eyes that were doing exactly what the man's eyes were doing, working. The dog wasn't straining, wasn't displaying aggression. It was doing something quieter and more serious than that. It had identified a threat, communicated that identification to its handler, and was now waiting. The growl had come from the dog. The man was looking at Victor Kane. Not with hostility, exactly. With the kind of still, patient attention you gave something that required your complete focus. Victor had turned on his stool. The two men by the entrance had straightened. Elena watched one of them shift his right hand to his hip, a practiced movement that ended about an inch above where a holster would sit, and she thought, this is going to go somewhere bad, and it is going to go there very quickly. The stranger in the corner booth hadn't moved. His coffee mug was still in his hand, relaxed grip, like he'd been mid-sip when all of this started. "You got a leash law in this establishment?" Victor said. His voice was conversational. The stranger considered that for a moment. "Jax doesn't need a leash. That right? He's got good judgment." The man set his mug down. "Better than most." The restaurant was holding its breath again, but this time it was a different kind of held breath. The first kind had been fearful. This one was something else. Something that had been absent from this room for a very long time. Victor Kane studied the man for a long, calibrated moment. The stranger met his gaze without performance. No aggression, no posturing, no invitation. Just presence. The pure, undiluted attention of someone who had been in situations that made this one look moderate, and who therefore had nothing particular to prove right now. Victor's jaw shifted. It was barely perceptible, but Elena caught it. He stood, dropped cash on the counter, more than the coffee cost, which was its own kind of statement, generosity as dominance. He buttoned his jacket with unhurried hands. "Nice dog," he said. Then he walked out. His men followed. The door swung shut with a pneumatic sigh that sounded, in the silence that followed, almost like a room exhaling. For 3 full seconds, nobody spoke. Then the construction worker closest to the window started eating again, and the sound of his fork on the plate was the signal that broke the spell. And gradually, in increments, the room came back to life. Elena was still standing at the counter. She looked down at the two halves of the broken pen in her fist. She set them carefully on the counter, smoothed her apron. Then she walked to the corner booth. Up close, the man looked like someone who had not slept well in a while and had made a private agreement with himself not to let it show. There was a quality of compression to him, not tension exactly, but compressed energy like a spring that had decided not to be a spring today. The German shepherd turned its head toward her and she held out her knuckles without thinking. The dog sniffed once, decisive, then looked away, its assessment apparently complete. "He passed," the man said. "She," Elena said. "I can tell by the build." A slight pause. "You've worked with military working dogs." It wasn't a question. She didn't answer it. You want more coffee? She asked instead. I'm fine. He looked at her with the same still attention he'd turned on Victor Kane, though it was clearly a different mode, information gathering rather than threat assessment. You all right? I'm fine, she said. That's 2 fines in 30 seconds. Is there something I can get you? He studied her for a moment. Then he reached into his jacket. Slowly, the motion careful and deliberate in the way of someone who understood that reaching into a jacket could be read multiple ways, and produced a business card, which he turned face down on the table and pushed toward her. In case you need it, he said. No obligation. She picked it up without looking at it, slid it into her apron pocket. Thank you for... she started. Didn't do anything. He picked up his coffee mug. Jax expressed an opinion. I just happened to be there. Something tightened in her throat, which was stupid, and she didn't let it show. The eggs are cold, she said. I can get you a new plate. They're fine. That's your 3rd fine. His mouth shifted. Not quite a smile. Something in the vicinity. Fair point. She went back to work. She didn't look at the business card until her break, 2 hours later, in the narrow corridor behind the industrial dishwasher that smelled permanently of steam and industrial detergent, her preferred location for private moments, because nobody sought her out back there. The card was plain. No logo. An agency she didn't recognize with a Washington, D.C. prefix she almost recognized. A name, Ethan Cross. And below that, handwritten in small clean letters, former SEAL, DevGru. Jax is 4th Battalion, MWD, retired on medical. She turned it over. On the back, also handwritten, I heard what he said about your sister. Elena stood in the steam corridor for a long moment, listening to the industrial dishwasher cycle through its program. Then she put the card back in her apron pocket, straightened her shoulders, and went back to work. By the time she retrieved Maya from school at 3:15, she had almost convinced herself that the morning had been an aberration. Victor flexing because he'd wanted to flex. He did that occasionally, reminded people of the geometry of power in Blackstone Falls, the way a property owner might walk their fence line. It didn't always mean something specific. Sometimes it was just maintenance. She'd almost convinced herself. Maya was quiet on the walk home. She usually was. The child communicated in textures rather than words. She'd press close when she wanted comfort, pull slightly ahead when she was processing something, fall exactly in step when she was scared. Right now, she was pressing close. How was school? Elena asked. Fine. She looked down. Maya was clutching Captain against her chest, which she rarely did outside the apartment. The teddy bear's worn left ear was folded in Maya's fist. You brought Captain to school today? A pause. I felt like it. Elena didn't push. She reached down and took Maya's free hand, and they walked the last 3 blocks like that. She didn't notice the car until they were half a block from home. Dark sedan. Engine running, not idling, running, the hood barely vibrating, which meant a tuned engine, which meant money. Parked at the curb in front of the hardware store below their apartment, which had been closed since 2 o'clock on Tuesdays for the past 4 years. Nobody parked there in the afternoon. Elena's pace didn't change. She kept walking, kept her grip on Maya's hand light and easy, steered them slightly to the far side of the sidewalk by small increments. She looked at the sedan the way she'd learned to look at things she was assessing in the field, in her peripheral vision, casually, her gaze never landing on it directly. 2 men in the front, neither looking at her, both looking at their phones. Which was what you did when you didn't want to appear to be watching someone, and which meant they were watching her. Hey, Maya Bird. Her voice was normal. She was proud of that. Let's go in the back way. I want to check on the garden. There was no garden. Maya, who was 7 and trauma-altered but not stupid, looked up at her aunt with the clear, unsettling perception of a child who has learned to read the air in a room. Is something wrong? Maya asked quietly. Nope. Elena squeezed her hand once. Just feels like a backdoor kind of afternoon. She got them inside, got Maya settled with snacks and a book she wasn't actually reading, and then stood in her kitchen for a long moment with her hands flat on the counter and her eyes closed and her mind running through options the way it used to run through triage protocols, fast, sequential, unsentimental. She reached into her apron pocket. She was still holding the card when her phone rang. Unknown number, she answered. Miss Brooks. The voice was Victor Kane's. Smooth, unhurried, like the telephone version of a man who owns the room. I hope the afternoon's treating you well. She said nothing. I've been thinking, he continued, about our conversation this morning, about community, about a brief pause, timed with the precision of someone who understood the architecture of intimidation. Certain responsibilities we have to the children in our care. Her knuckles went white around the phone. She made herself loosen them. I received an interesting phone call myself this afternoon, Kane said, from an associate of mine in County Child Services. Another pause. Apparently there's been a concern raised about living conditions, about supervision, about whether a child in certain circumstances might be better served in a more stable environment. The kitchen was very quiet. Maya had started humming softly in the other room, some wordless song she'd invented, and the sound of it hit Elena somewhere below the sternum. Nothing's been filed yet, Kane said. These things take time, paperwork, review processes. His voice carried the particular warmth of someone explaining something simple to someone slow. I just wanted you to be aware, so you can plan accordingly. The line went dead. Elena set her phone on the counter. She looked at the business card in her other hand. She looked at the kitchen doorway where Maya's humming continued, small and private and completely unaware. Then she picked up her phone again and she dialed. It rang twice. Cross, the voice said. It's Elena Brooks. She kept her voice level. From the diner. I know who it is. You said in case I needed it. A pause. She heard something shift. The sound of him standing, she thought. A chair. Where are you right now? My apartment. Stay there. His voice had changed. Not urgent exactly, purposeful. Don't open the door for anyone until I get there. Not the building manager, not the mailman, nobody. A brief pause. Does Maya know how to stay quiet if she needs to? The question landed like a stone in still water. Yes, Elena said. She does. Good, I'm 12 minutes out. The line went quiet but didn't close. He left it open. She could hear road noise, a turn signal, the measured sound of someone driving without rushing and moving fast anyway. Elena walked to Maya's doorway. Her niece looked up from her book, the one she wasn't really reading, with those dark eyes that saw too much. We're going to play the quiet game for a little while, okay, baby? Elena said. Maya looked at her for a long moment. Then she looked at Captain, still clutched in her arm. Okay, she said softly. For how long? Until a friend of mine gets here. Do I know them? No. Elena leaned against the door frame. But I think you'll like his dog. Maya's expression shifted. Something small and careful, not quite a smile, just the slight warming of a face that had learned to ration its warmth. What kind of dog? She asked. Big one, Elena said. Smart. She left Maya in the doorway and walked back to the kitchen window. Down on the street, the dark sedan was still parked at the curb. The men were still looking at their phones. Neither of them had moved. But one of them, the one in the passenger seat, had turned his head. He was looking directly at her window. She stepped back from the glass. Her phone was still in her hand, the line to Ethan Cross still open, the sound of the road still coming through. She pressed it against her ear and waited, counting her heartbeats the way she used to count them in the field, when everything else was gone, and the only reliable thing left in the world was the rhythm of her own blood. 11 minutes. She could hold a position for 11 minutes. She'd held harder ones. Outside, the sedan's engine idled on, and in Maya's room, Captain the teddy bear sat propped against the pillow with his worn thin ears and his faded smile, holding, sewn into his left side seam, in a waterproof sleeve that Sophie had placed there 14 months ago and 2 days before she died. A flash drive. He knocked 3 times. Paused. 2 more. Elena recognized the pattern for what it was, that not a code exactly, but a habit. Military personnel didn't knock randomly. They knocked with intention, giving the person inside a way to distinguish between someone who knew what they were doing and someone who didn't. She checked the peephole first. Ethan Cross stood in the hallway, with Jack seated at his left heel, the dog's ears forward, its posture the specific alertness of an animal that had already swept the stairwell and found it acceptable. Ethan was carrying a dark duffel bag over one shoulder, and he was scanning the hallway behind him with his peripheral vision even as he faced the door. She undid the chain, the deadbolt, the lock. In that order. He came inside without being asked, moved immediately to the left of the doorframe rather than standing in the center of it, and turned to assess the apartment in the quick, compartmentalized way of someone running a room clearance in their head out of pure reflex. She watched him do it and didn't say anything because she'd done the exact same thing when she first moved in. 2 exits, he said. It wasn't a question. Front door and the fire escape off the kitchen window, the window sticks. Show me. She showed him. He examined the window latch for about 4 seconds, produced a small multi-tool from his jacket pocket, made 2 adjustments she couldn't quite follow, and tested it. It slid clean. I've been fighting that thing for 8 months, she said. Bent track. He folded the tool away. Simple fix. Jax had moved through the apartment on her own, nose working at floor level, and had arrived at Maya's doorway and stopped. The dog sat down and looked back at Ethan. She's good, he said to the dog. Easy. Jax dropped her chin onto her forepaws and settled. Maya, who had appeared in the doorway at some point during this without Elena noticing, was staring at the German shepherd with an expression that Elena hadn't seen on the child's face in a very long time. Pure, uncomplicated wonder. Is that Jax? Maya said. That's Jax, Ethan confirmed. She's huge. She knows. Maya looked up at Ethan Cross with the frank, unfiltered appraisal that 7-year-olds hadn't yet learned to disguise. Then she looked back at the dog. Then she sat down cross-legged on the floor, 3 feet away, and waited with the patient instinct of a child who understood that trust was something you let animals extend to you rather than the other way around. Jax's tail moved once. Then the dog shifted forward on her elbows, closing the distance herself. Elena watched it happen and felt something pull tight in her chest that she didn't examine. Come on, she said to Ethan, and led him to the kitchen table. She made coffee because it gave her hands something to do. He sat at the table with his duffel at his feet and his elbows on the surface and didn't speak while she worked, which she appreciated more than she expected to. Most people filled silences out of discomfort. Ethan Cross seemed to experience silence as a neutral condition rather than a problem requiring solution. She set a mug in front of him and sat across the table. The sedan outside is still there, he said. I know. 2 men. Passenger side ran plates on his phone about 6 minutes after you 2 came in the back. They're not trying to hide that they're here. He turned the mug in his hands. That's deliberate. Kane wants you to know you're being watched. It's a pressure tactic. I know what it is. He looked at her. I know you do. A beat passed. Army, he said. Combat medic, based on the way you assessed Jax when you first saw her. You clocked her build, her working status, and her handler relationship in about 2 seconds. That's not civilian observation. 68 whiskey, she said. 2 tours, Kandahar first, then Kunar province. She paused. You? Nishao. Devgru before that got too complicated to explain at dinner tables. He said it the way veterans said things. That, factually, without embellishment, the way you'd state a job title. Got out 14 months ago. Why? He looked at his coffee. My brother died. I was on a rotation in an undisclosed location when it happened, and I didn't make it back in time. A pause, brief and very controlled. He was sick for about 8 weeks. I knew. I stayed in theater anyway because the mission had a hard timeline. He turned the mug once more. I've been figuring out what to do with that decision ever since. Elena said nothing. She recognized the specific quality of that kind of guilt, the kind that didn't have a clean resolution, that you couldn't triage your way out of. You just carried it until it became part of your weight distribution. What brings you to Blackstone Falls? She asked. Passing through. I do that a lot lately. He looked up. Or I was, until this morning. You don't owe me anything. What happened in the diner? Jax made a call. I backed her up. He set the mug down. That's how it works. He held her gaze. Tell me about your sister. The kitchen was quiet. In the next room, Maya was making soft sounds, talking to Jax, the one-sided quiet conversation she had with things she trusted. Elena looked at the table surface, a water ring from a previous mug, a small scratch along the grain she'd never gotten around to fixing. Sophie was 2 years younger than me, she said. She was the kind of person who picked up injured birds. You know the type. Not naive about it. She knew most of them didn't make it. She just couldn't not try. Elena turned her own mug. She moved here 5 years ago for a job at the county health office, public health coordinator. The job that got cut 3 years ago when Kane's people got their guy on the county budget committee. Ethan didn't say anything. He was listening the way you listened when you needed accurate information, not the performed listening of someone waiting for their turn to speak. After the job ended, she stayed. By then she'd found something. Elena's voice was careful, measured. She had access to certain county health records through her previous position: death records, hospitalization records, overdose statistics. She started cross-referencing them against shipping manifests from a distribution company Kane operates out of the Eastern Warehouse District. Elena paused. The numbers didn't line up. The volume of product coming through didn't match any legitimate supply chain. And the overdose clusters, the spikes in fatalities, they tracked precisely with certain delivery cycles. Ethan was very still. She documented all of it, Elena said. 14 months of documentation. Financial records she obtained through sources I don't know and don't want to know. Delivery schedules. Payment transfers through Shell LLCs. Names. She stopped. Including the names of 3 county officials and the assistant sheriff. The kitchen light hummed softly overhead. Through the apartment wall, very faintly, the sound of the sedan idling on the street below. She came to me 6 weeks before she died, Elena continued. She was scared. She said she thought someone had been in her apartment. Nothing obvious, just the feeling. The way things were slightly wrong. She'd been a public health worker long enough to understand what the data meant about Kane's operation and what it would mean if he found out she had it. Elena's jaw tightened. I told her to go to the authorities. And she pointed out correctly that the assistant sheriff's name was in her files. Elena looked up. I told her to go federal. She said she was working on it. She said she just needed a little more time to make the package complete. More documentation, more ironclad. She didn't have the time, Ethan said quietly. 22 days later, she was found in her apartment, ruled an overdose, oxycodone and fentanyl combination. Elena's voice didn't break. She'd had 14 months to make sure it wouldn't. Sophie didn't use, not recreationally, not at all. She'd watched the data long enough to know exactly what fentanyl contamination did to a body. She wouldn't have touched that combination voluntarily. But the ruling stood. The ruling stood. Elena set down her mug. Because the medical examiner in this county has an understanding with Victor Kane. The same way everyone in an official capacity in this county has an understanding with Victor Kane. Her eyes met his. And I have been sitting on everything she told me for 14 months, because every channel I could think of runs through someone compromised, and I have a 7-year-old child in the next room who has already lost her mother. Ethan Cross looked at her for a long moment. The evidence, he said. Where is it? Elena was quiet for 3 seconds. Sophie hid it, she said, before she died. She called me the night before and she said she was sending me something, and that I should keep it safe, and that I shouldn't go looking for it because if I didn't know where it was, then I couldn't be pressured about it. But you found it anyway. It wasn't a question. He'd read her correctly, which was either impressive or unsettling, and she hadn't decided which. It came in the mail 3 days after she died, Elena said. A package. Inside was Captain. She glanced toward the other room, where the sound of Maya talking softly to Jax continued. Maya's teddy bear. Sophie had it. Maya had left it at her apartment during a visit. I didn't think anything of it. I just gave it to Maya because she'd been asking for it, and because it smelled like Sophie and Maya needed that. She stopped. It took me 4 months to figure it out, she said, quieter now. I was going through Maya's things to wash them, and Captain felt wrong. Too heavy. Sophie had sewn a waterproof sleeve into the left side seam. She paused. A flash drive. Ethan's expression didn't change dramatically, but something behind his eyes shifted. The specific alertness of a person who has just understood the full geometry of a situation and is now running calculations. Have you looked at it? He asked. Enough to know what's on it. She held his gaze. I didn't go through all of it. I was afraid. If I opened it on my own devices, if there was any way to trace that access. Smart. He said it without condescension, a professional assessment. Where is it right now? She nodded toward the doorway. He followed her gaze. Through the door, Maya sat on the floor with Jax's large head resting across her small legs, Captain tucked under the child's arm, the bear's worn face tipped upward at the ceiling. She carries it everywhere, Elena said. She's had it since Sophie died. It's the one thing she won't put down when she's scared. Ethan Cross looked at the child and the dog and the bear for a moment. Then he rubbed his face with both hands. A human gesture, exhausted and unguarded, the first one she'd seen from him, and said, "Okay." "Okay what?" "Okay, I need to make a call, Dad." He went to the kitchen window, not in front of it, beside it, angled so he could see the street below without being visible from it, and made a call that lasted 4 minutes and 20 seconds. Elena tracked it by the clock on the microwave. She didn't try to hear the conversation. She washed both coffee mugs and dried them, and put them away and thought about everything and tried not to think about anything. When he came back to his face was composed, but his jaw had the slight set of someone who had received information they'd been half expecting and found it no easier for the expectation. "I have a contact," he said, "federal. He's been working an investigation for approximately 2 years that's been stalled for want of a specific piece of local evidence strong enough to compel a sealed warrant." He sat down. "They've had Kane's operation mapped from the distribution side for a while. What they've been missing is the financial documentation linking him directly to the product and to the deaths. Chain of custody evidence, not just the trafficking itself." Elena was very still. "Sophie's files," she said. "If they contain what you think they contain." He leaned forward slightly. "My contact says the investigation is real. The investigators are clean, and they've been waiting for a whistleblower connection in Blackstone Falls for 18 months. There was someone, they don't say who, they lost contact with." He paused. 14 months ago. The microwave clock said 6:47 p.m. Elena thought about Sophie on the phone the night before she died. Her voice carefully measured the way it got when she was scared and didn't want to show it. "I'm sending you something. Keep it safe. Don't look for it." "He needs the drive," Elena said. "He needs to verify what's on it. If it matches what they have from their end, they can move." Ethan held her gaze. "This doesn't go through local channels. Not the sheriff, not the county, not anyone in Blackstone Falls. It goes straight to the federal field office in Morgantown, and my contact meets you there personally. Morgantown is 40 miles. I know. Through the mountain pass. I know. And Kane has people who watch that road. I know that too." He didn't look away from her, "which is why we don't go tonight. Tonight we sit tight, we figure out exactly what's on that drive, and we put together a complete picture of what we're handing over. Then we pick a window and we move fast." He paused. "But Elena..." She noticed he'd switched to her first name without apparently deciding to. She noticed she didn't mind. "Kane called you this afternoon because something made him nervous today," Ethan continued. "The diner this morning put him off his script by about 30 seconds. That's not much. But men like Kane don't like variables they didn't introduce." His voice was even. "He's accelerating the timeline on whatever he was already planning. The child services angle. That wasn't improvised. That was a mechanism he already had in place. He's deploying it now instead of later." The cold thing in her chest that had been there since the phone call settled into a harder, more definite shape. "How long do we have?" she asked. "If the complaint is filed tomorrow, and I think it gets filed tomorrow, you have somewhere between 48 and 72 hours before a welfare check becomes a formal assessment, and a formal assessment with a compromised assessor becomes a removal order." He said it straightforwardly, without softening it, and she was grateful for that. She'd been in enough briefings to know that softened information was the most dangerous kind. "We need to move before that clock runs out." Elena stood up and went to the doorway of the living room. Maya had fallen asleep. It had happened quietly, the way it sometimes did. The child simply slipping under between one moment and the next, Jack still beneath her hands, Captain tucked against her side. The apartment was warm and the dog's presence had apparently done what nothing else had managed, given Maya's nervous system permission to stand down. Elena leaned against the doorframe and looked at her niece for a long moment. 14 months of carrying this, of getting up at 4:47 every morning to check the locks, of carrying the weight of what she knew and what she couldn't do about it, of watching Maya slowly, incrementally learn to breathe again, while Elena herself moved through each day like someone performing the role of a functional person with increasing professionalism. She heard Ethan come to stand behind her. Not close, A respectful distance, the kind of distance you maintained in field medicine when someone needed space but shouldn't be alone. She looks like Sophie, Elena said quietly. Around the eyes. He didn't respond. He didn't need to. Okay, she said. She straightened up, turned around. We look at the drive tonight. I need to know exactly what's on it before I hand it to anyone, federal contact or not. She held his gaze. And I need to know what happens to Maya if this goes wrong. It won't. Don't. Her voice was quiet but certain. Don't tell me it won't go wrong. Tell me what happens if it does. Give me the contingency. He looked at her for a moment. Then he nodded, once. A concession. And also, she thought, something like respect. My contact can arrange immediate protective custody for Maya as a material witness is dependent. That's a federal protection. It bypasses local jurisdiction entirely. If something happens to you, she goes into a protection protocol, not county foster care. He paused. Nothing will get filed that gives Kane's people any legal mechanism. Elena exhaled slowly. All right, she said. Give me 10 minutes. She went to Maya's room and carefully extracted Captain from the sleeping child's arm, replacing the bear with a spare pillow in a smooth motion that didn't disturb the sleeping girl's grip. Maya shifted, made a small sound, and resettled. Elena took the bear to the kitchen table, sat down under the overhead light, and found the seam. Sophie had done careful work. The stitching on the left side was slightly different from the original, marginally tighter, a different thread weight, the kind of difference you'd only notice if you knew what you were looking for. Elena had found it the first time by feel, by the slight stiffness in the fabric. She found the point where the thread was anchored with an extra pass, took a small pair of scissors from the kitchen drawer and cut 4 stitches. The waterproof sleeve was black nylon, heat-sealed on 3 sides. She pressed it and felt the flat rectangle inside. She set it on the table. Ethan had his laptop open. He set it between them without comment. She picked up the sleeve, unsealed the 4th edge, and tipped the drive out onto the table. It was smaller than she remembered. Thumbnail drive, brushed aluminum casing, a single indicator light that was dark. 14 months of sitting inside a stuffed animal, guarded by a 7-year-old who didn't know what she was carrying. Elena picked it up and held it for one moment. Sophie had touched this, had sealed it into a waterproof sleeve and sewn it into a child's toy with the specific, terrible pragmatism of someone who understood they might not survive what came next, but who was determined that the truth would. She plugged it in. The indicator light came on. Green. Ethan angled the laptop toward both of them. The drive mounted. A single folder labeled with a date from 16 months ago, 2 months before Sophie died. Inside, 47 files, spreadsheets, PDFs, audio recordings. A folder within a folder labeled Chain of Custody, Do Not Move Files. Elena clicked the first spreadsheet. Columns of figures resolved on screen, dates, quantities, dollar amounts, account numbers. She scanned them and felt the shape of it assembling in her mind the way a triage situation assembled, in fast categorical logic. This was product volume. This was corresponding revenue. This column was the distribution account. This one was the shell company. And this one, here, she pointed. This is the payment column that runs to the county account. That's the mechanism for the officials. It's not direct. It runs through a consulting LLC. But Sophie's cross-referenced it here. She scrolled down. Every payment correlates to a date where a complaint was dismissed, or an inspection was canceled, or a case was closed. Ethan was reading faster than she was. She could tell by the way his eyes moved. The audio files, he said. She clicked the folder. 42 recordings, each labeled with a date and a set of initials. She clicked one at random. A voice she didn't recognize, speaking in the measured tone of someone who thought they were being professional. The next shipment comes through the 31st. Make sure Harlow's people are off the east route from 11 p.m. to 2 a.m. A pause. Then a second voice, one she did recognize, a voice she'd heard at town council meetings, on the local radio station, at the 4th of July parade. Understood. The usual arrangement? First voice. Plus 15. We lost product last month. Second voice. Fine. Fine. She stopped the recording. The kitchen was very quiet. Harlow, Ethan said. He said it the way you said a name when it had just connected to something larger. Deputy Harlow. He runs the night patrols on the East County Road. Yes, Elena said. Ethan sat back in his chair. He pressed two fingers to his mouth and looked at the screen with the expression of someone who had just taken a full accounting of a situation and found it worse than projected and was integrating that information without the luxury of reacting to it. There's more, Elena said. She navigated to the subfolder labeled Overdose Correlation. This is what Sophie built from the public health records. She mapped every overdose death in the county for 32 months against Kane's distribution schedule. She opened the master file. 81 deaths. Of those, 63 are statistically linked to contaminated product from Kane's supply chain. The fentanyl concentration spikes, her voice remained level, she kept it level. The concentration spikes in the product correlate exactly with the periods when Kane was undercutting a competitor by cutting his product differently. He knew the concentration was lethal. The internal communications prove he knew. Ethan looked at her. Your sister, he said carefully, is in here. Elena's finger touched the trackpad, didn't click. File 44. Her name is in the death correlation data. Her overdose matches the fentanyl spike from the 3rd week of that month. She paused. There's a separate file. Sophie made a separate file for herself. She knew she was on his radar. She documented 2 incidents of possible surveillance, a conversation she overheard that she believed referenced her by description, and Elena stopped. A conversation she recorded 4 days before she died. She clicked it. Sophie's voice came out of the laptop speakers, and Elena's hand went absolutely flat on the table because she had not heard her sister's voice in 14 months, and the sound of it was like a physical impact, something that hit before the brain could intercept it. Sophie was calm on the recording. Professionally calm. The kind of calm you constructed when you were frightened. I have reason to believe my apartment has been accessed without my consent on at least 2 occasions. I'm making this record on the 14th as a precautionary measure. If something happens to me, the complete documentation is secured. Elena knows how to find it. She won't come looking. She's careful. She'll wait. But she'll know. A pause. Then, softer, less professional. Maya's going to be okay. She has Elena. Elena is the toughest person I have ever met in my entire life, and she doesn't know it, which is probably why it's true. Elena stopped the recording. She looked at the table, the water ring, the old scratch in the wood. Ethan didn't speak. He didn't offer anything. He just sat there, present, in the way that was apparently the only kind of presence he knew how to offer, complete and without condition. After a while, she reached up and closed the laptop. I need to call your contact, she said. Her voice was even. She was proud of that. Tonight? He asked. Tonight. We plan the route to Morgantown. We figure out the window, and we move before that child services complaint turns into something actionable. She looked at him across the table. You said 48 to 72 hours. At most. Then we have tomorrow. She pushed her chair back. I want to be on that road by first light the day after. Ethan nodded. He reached for his phone, then stopped. Elena, he said it quietly. What your sister said on that recording, I heard it. She was right. She stood up, picked up Captain from the table, and walked back to Maya's room. She tucked the bear under the sleeping child's arm with the same careful, practiced motion as before. Maya's small fingers found the worn ear without waking, closed around it. Elena straightened up. Down the hall, she could hear Ethan already on the phone, his voice low and clipped and utterly without wasted words. The voice of someone accustomed to transmitting critical information in compressed time frames. She leaned against the doorframe of Maya's room and watched her niece breathe. 47 files, 81 deaths, 63 confirmed, one name she couldn't say out loud yet, and a road to Morgantown that ran 40 miles through mountain dark, past Kane's people, through a pass that iced over by November. But it was October barely, so the road was clear and the window was real, and Sophie had held it together long enough to make sure the truth survived her. The least Elena could do was make sure it got where it was going. She went back to the kitchen, pulled out a chair, sat across from Ethan, who was finishing his call. When he lowered the phone, she said, Tell me about your contact. Everything. I want to know who I'm handing this to. And outside, down on the street below, the dark sedan's engine finally cut off, which was worse than when it had been running, because it meant someone had decided to stop waiting and start watching. Ethan was off the phone in under 2 minutes. He set it face down on the table and looked at her with the particular expression of someone who had just received a set of facts and was deciding how to arrange them before delivery. His name is Agent Marcus Webb, he said. DEA, but he's been seconded to a joint federal task force for the past 22 months. I served with his brother in Ramadi in 2009. Webb's clean. I've vetted him independently twice since I got out. He has no connections to Blackstone Falls, no connections to any county infrastructure in this region, and his task force operates out of the Morgantown field office, which reports directly to the regional SAC, not through any local chain. How fast can he move if we get him the drive? He said if the documentation matches what they have from their end, and from what you just showed me, he can have a sealed warrant application in front of a federal judge within 6 hours of receiving it. The raids don't happen immediately. There's a staging process, but the legal mechanism starts the moment the evidence is verified. Elena did the arithmetic. If we leave at first light tomorrow and reach Morgantown by 7 a.m., legal process could be underway before noon, he paused. The child services situation is the variable. If Kane's complaint hits the county system tonight, a welfare check could come as early as tomorrow morning. A welfare check we can handle. A formal assessment order is different. That requires you to be present and cooperative or it triggers an escalated response. He looked at her steadily. We cannot be in Morgantown when that happens. So we need to move faster. Or we need to know when the complaint gets filed. She thought about that. About the network of people in this town who had quietly, separately, concluded that silence was survivable and courage wasn't. About the ones who had made that calculation not out of cowardice but out of arithmetic. Children to protect. Mortgages, elderly parents, the specific math of people who couldn't afford to lose. Donna Marsh, she said. Ethan looked at her. She works the night intake desk at the county social services office. Her daughter was in Sophie's public health program 3 years ago, Teen Outreach, the one Kane defunded after Sophie started asking questions. Elena stood up. Donna's never said a word against Kane publicly, but she brought flowers to Sophie's funeral, and she cried, and she didn't think anyone saw her. She moved toward the phone on the counter. She might tell me if something comes through tonight. Elena. His voice was careful. If she tells you and Kane finds out she told you, I know. She picked up her phone. I won't ask her directly. I'll give her something she can say no to without explaining why. She dialed. It rang 4 times, long enough that she thought it would go to voicemail. Hello? Donna Marsh sounded like someone who'd been watching television with the volume too high and had turned it down to answer. Donna, it's Elena Brooks. I'm sorry to call in the evening. A pause. Brief, but Elena read it. Elena, is everything all right? Fine, thank you. I'm sorry to bother you. I had a question about the process for updating Maya's legal guardianship paperwork. I know your office handles some of that, and I wanted to know about timing, whether I should come in tomorrow morning or if the office has something going on that might make it a bad time to visit. Silence. Not the silence of someone thinking about the question. The silence of someone understanding the real question underneath it. I'd probably, Donna said, slowly and very carefully, avoid coming in early tomorrow. Mornings have been very busy lately, very unpredictable. A pause. I'd suggest coming in later in the week if you can manage it. Of course, Elena said. Thank you, Donna. I appreciate it. Take care of that little girl, Donna said. And then quieter, something that wasn't quite audible over the phone. That might have been I'm sorry, or might have been nothing at all. The line disconnected. Elena set the phone down. Tomorrow morning, she said. Ethan stood up. Then we leave tonight. The problem with leaving tonight was the sedan. It was still parked below, visible from the kitchen window. The 2 men in it now, a fixed variable in any plan that involved Elena and Maya, walking out the front of the building with a bag and a flash drive and a German Shepherd. Ethan stood at the window angle and looked at it for a while. Elena stood beside him and looked at it too. Jax had moved to the kitchen doorway and was sitting alert, some shift in the apartment's atmosphere having communicated to the dog that the status had changed. Back door exits to the alley, Elena said. Alley runs north to Creston, south to the service road behind the hardware store. Service road connects to Mill Street. Is there another vehicle they'd have on the south end? I don't know, probably. She thought about it. Kane's not stupid. He knows there are two ways out of this building. What's at the north end of Creston? Community church parking lot. They leave it unlocked for AA meetings. Ethan turned away from the window. Can you drive a standard transmission? Yes. I have a truck. It's parked 3 blocks north on Hanover. I didn't park on this street when I came over. Habit. He was already moving with the quiet efficiency of someone whose thinking and doing had long since collapsed into a single action. If we go out the back, north through the alley to Creston, through the church lot, I can reach the truck from there without coming back this direction. And the sedan sees nothing until we're already on Hanover. By the time they reposition, we have a 2-minute head start minimum. He looked at her. Is that enough? On the Morgantown Road at night? She considered. There's only one route for the first 12 miles. After that it branches. Old Logging Road cuts off northwest and rejoins the main road 9 miles later. Cuts about 4 minutes off the overall time, but it's unpaved and rough. I'll take rough. I know you will. She was already moving toward the hallway. Give me 8 minutes. 8 minutes was optimistic. It took her 11, and she knew it, and didn't waste time being frustrated about it. Waking Maya was the first obstacle. The child surfaced from sleep in the slow, resistant way she always did, confused and then immediately quietly frightened in the way she went frightened, without sound, her eyes going wide and her body going still. We're going on a trip, Elena said, kneeling in front of her. Tonight, right now. It's dark, Maya said. I know, we need to go anyway. She held Maya's gaze. Do you remember what we practiced? The quiet game, the fast moving, the no questions until we're somewhere safe? They had practiced it. Not formally, not explained as a protocol. Elena had worked it into games, into routines, into the natural architecture of their life together. In case. She had been building for in case since the day she understood what Sophie had left her. Maya looked at her for a long moment. Then she looked at Jax, who had come to the doorway of the bedroom and was standing with her ears forward and her tail low and still. Jax is coming? Maya asked. Jax is coming. Maya got up. She dressed herself without being asked, which still, every time, hit Elena somewhere complicated. The self-sufficiency of a child who had learned early that adults had limited bandwidth and that the way to help was to need less. Elena packed a bag in 4 minutes flat. Documents, medications, 2 changes of clothes for Maya, one for herself, the laptop, the charger, the flash drive sealed back in its waterproof sleeve in the interior pocket of her jacket, directly against her ribs. She looked around the apartment. The water ring on the kitchen table. The window latch Ethan had fixed. The photograph of Sophie on the refrigerator. Maya at age 4 on Sophie's lap, both of them laughing at something outside the frame. She took the photograph off the refrigerator and put it in the bag. Then she went to the front room and looked at the locks she checked every morning. Front door, deadbolt, chain. She didn't check them. She turned away from them. She picked up the bag. Ready? She said. Maya was standing in the hallway with Captain tucked under her arm, her small backpack on, her shoes on the right feet. Ready, she said. The alley smelled like rain and old dumpsters and the cold that had started coming off the mountains in the last week, the early edge of the season arriving ahead of schedule. Elena moved them fast and quiet, Maya's hand in hers, Jax at Ethan's left heel with the leash on. Not because the dog needed the leash, but because a dog off-leash at 11 p.m. in an alley was a visibility problem they didn't need. North, past the back of the hardware store, the shuttered insurance office, the side wall of what had been the pediatric clinic. The alley was unlit except for the yellow bleed of a security light above a loading dock 3 buildings down, and Elena moved them through the shadow margins with the unconscious route finding of someone who had navigated worse terrain with less visibility. Maya didn't make a sound. Creston Road was empty. They crossed in the gap between 2 streetlights, through the church parking lot, gravel, 12 cars. The AA meeting was apparently still running because warm light came from the fellowship hall windows, and Elena could hear, just barely, the murmur of voices inside. People in a room, telling the truth about themselves to other people who needed to hear it. She registered the thought and let it go. Ethan's truck was where he'd said it was. Dark green, 4-door, the kind of 10-year-old American pickup that became effectively invisible in mountain country because every third vehicle was identical. He had it unlocked and running before Elena had finished buckling Maya into the back seat. Jax vaulted in beside Maya without instruction and settled, and Maya immediately pressed against the dog's flank. Ethan pulled out without lights until they were half a block from Hanover, then lights on, normal, unhurried. A truck leaving a quiet street at 11 p.m. Nothing remarkable. Elena watched the side mirror. The cross street 2 blocks back stayed empty. They'd made it out before the repositioning. How long before they noticed, she asked. Depends whether they have someone on the back of the building. He took the turn onto Route 9 without slowing. 10 minutes if they do, 30 if they don't. She did the math. Morgantown was 40 miles, the first 12 on Route 9, then the turnoff. At night, mountain roads, no traffic, 55 minutes to the city. Call it an hour with the logging road cut off. If Kane's people had a vehicle on Route 9, they had communications, and they could have someone ahead of them within 15 minutes of making a call. We should assume 10, she said. Already am. He glanced at her. Call Webb. Tell him we're en route. He needs to be at the field office when we arrive. She made the call. Webb answered on the second ring, the fast answer of someone who'd been waiting with the phone close. She gave him the ETA without context. He said 4 words, I'll be there. Then the call was done, and the dark mountain road opened up ahead of them, and Ethan accelerated to 72 and held it. In the back seat, Maya's voice came soft and unexpected. Are we in trouble? Ethan's eyes went to the rearview mirror. Elena turned in her seat. Maya wasn't scared, or she was scared, but it was the functional, clear-eyed version, the kind she'd learned. She was just asking a real question because she was a real person who deserved a real answer. Some, Elena said, not the kind that beats us. Maya absorbed this. She looked at Jax. Does Jax know? From the front, without taking his eyes off the road, Ethan said, Jax always knows. Maya pressed her face into the dog's neck. Her shoulders dropped a fraction. Not all the way, but a fraction. Elena turned back around. 12 miles to the turnoff. The road was clear, the mountain dark on both sides, the tree line close enough to the shoulder that the headlights caught the edge of the forest and turned it into a wall of black and pale silver. No other vehicles. No headlights in the mirror. 8 minutes in, that changed. We've got company, Ethan said. His voice didn't change register. Single vehicle, approximately a mile back. Came on fast and then matched our speed. That's deliberate. Elena checked the passenger mirror. Headlights, high beams, staying exactly a mile back. Not closing, not falling behind. They're not trying to stop us, she said. They're tracking us. And calling ahead. His jaw was set. The turnoff is 4 miles. If they have someone positioned on Route 9 past the junction, they can box us. Yes. She thought fast. The logging road was 9 miles of bad surface that shook a vehicle to pieces and required 4-wheel drive to navigate in anything wet, which the ground currently was after 2 days of rain. After the logging road rejoined the main route, there were 20 miles of open highway to Morgantown with no useful cover and no alternate routes. 20 miles was too long with a vehicle that could outrun them on pavement. Is this truck 4-wheel? Yes. How's the clearance? High enough? Then we take the logging road and we don't come back to the main route. She pulled out her phone. I know the Morgantown approach from the north. There's a state forest access road that hits Route 7 about 6 miles outside the city. It's longer, but it comes in from a direction they won't have covered. She was already pulling the map up. 13 extra miles, adds maybe 18 minutes. Webb needs to know the new approach vector. I'll text him. She was already typing. He said to send all secondary comms through text in case the call log gets pulled. Smart man. The turnoff was coming up. Ethan slowed by 20 miles per hour, a smooth deceleration that didn't look like a decision until the last possible moment. And then he took the turn and the paved road ended and the logging road began, and the truck immediately began doing what trucks did on unpaved mountain roads at speed, which was protest loudly and continuously through every joint and panel. Maya made a sound. Hang on, Maya Bird, Elena said. I'm hanging, Maya said, in the matter-of-fact tone of a child who was genuinely trying to be helpful. The logging road was worse than Elena remembered. There had been erosion since she'd last driven it, runoff channels cutting across the surface, places where the road narrowed to a lane and a half with a steep drop to the left that the headlights barely caught before they were past it. Ethan drove it the way he did everything, with focused economy, no overcorrection, reading the surface ahead and making adjustments early rather than reactively. He wasn't flashy about it. He was just competent, the deep structural kind that didn't need to announce itself. 3 minutes in, Elena checked the side mirror. No headlights on the logging road. They didn't follow, she said. They don't know this road. He didn't relax. They're calling Kane right now. He'll reroute to intercept on Route 7 if he has people close enough to Morgantown. How long do we have? Depends how many people he has and how close they are to the city. He glanced at her. Webb needs to know to have a clear approach on Route 7. If Kane's people position themselves before we hit the city limits, I'll handle it. She was already on the phone. Webb picked up before the first ring finished. She gave him the situation in 30 seconds flat. New approach vector. Possible intercept attempt on Route 7. ETA now approximately 75 minutes. Request for federal presence at the Route 7 entry point to Morgantown. Webb's voice was completely steady. He said he'd have 2 DEA vehicles at the Route 7 junction in 40 minutes. He said, "Get here in one piece." Then he was gone. 40 minutes for the DEA vehicles, she told Ethan. We're 75 minutes out. 35-minute gap. Yes, he processed that. We slow down on the back half. Let Webb's people get in position before we hit Route 7. Or we move fast and get to the junction before Kane can. We don't know Kane's timeline. We know Webb's. Slower is more predictable. We control the arrival. She thought about it. He was right, and she didn't enjoy it, which she recognized as a personal problem and set aside. Slower, she agreed. They came off the logging road 40 minutes later, a mile of mud and shuddering suspension, and 2 moments where the left rear wheel went soft on a washout, and Ethan corrected without comment and kept moving. The state forest access road was narrow but paved, winding through a valley she'd never had reason to enter, empty and dark and smelling of pine and cold creek water. Maya had fallen asleep again. Elena didn't know exactly when it had happened, at some point between the logging road's worst stretch and the forest access route. The child had simply gone under again, Jax's warmth and the truck's rhythm overcoming whatever fear had been keeping her eyes open. Captain was tucked under her chin. Elena watched her sleep in the mirror. 47 files. 81 deaths. Sophie's voice on a recording saying she's the toughest person I've ever met in the calm, frightened voice of someone who knew they were making a final document. She looked out the windshield at the dark road. "Tell me something about your brother," she said. It came out before she'd decided to say it. She wasn't sure why. Maybe because the forest road was long and quiet and the silence had weight, or maybe because she'd been carrying Sophie for 14 months and it seemed fair. Ethan was quiet for a moment. His name was Daniel, he said. He was a high school history teacher, coached junior varsity baseball in the spring. A pause. He was the kind of person who remembered everyone's birthday, not because he set reminders, just because he remembered. He adjusted his grip on the wheel. He used to say I was the family's proof of concept that a person can be competent without being particularly warm, and he meant it as a compliment, which tells you a lot about Daniel. Elena looked at him. I wasn't wrong, Ethan said without inflection. He sounds like Sophie, she said. The opposite type. The kind that makes you feel bad about being efficient. Exactly that kind. The road curved and he took it. I keep thinking I should have been there. At the end, he paused. I know objectively that being there wouldn't have changed the medical outcome. The cancer was what it was, but he would have wanted. He stopped. He would have wanted you there, Elena said. Yes. And you know that. Every day. She looked at the road. Sophie would have wanted me to use the evidence sooner, she said. I knew that too. I told myself I was waiting for the right channel, the right moment, but... She paused. I was scared. I had Maya, and I was scared, and I waited too long, and every day I waited, someone else might have... You waited the right amount of time, he said. You waited until there was a path that didn't get Maya taken away in the process. That's not cowardice. That's triage. She looked at him. You triaged it, he said simply. You assessed the situation, identified the constraint, and held until a viable course of action presented itself. He glanced over. That's not paralysis. That's discipline. She turned back to the windshield and didn't say anything for a while. The forest thinned. The road widened. Ahead, the first lights of approaching civilization began to separate themselves from the dark. Gas stations, a billboard, The orange glow of a town that was bigger than Blackstone Falls and indifferent to its existence. Route 7 was 3 miles ahead. Elena checked her phone. A text from Webb. 2 vehicles in position at Route 7 juncture. All clear on approach. Come straight in. Webb's there, she said. Ethan exhaled slowly. Just the one breath, deliberate. She looked at the mirror. The road behind them was dark and empty. No headlights. No pursuit. Either Kane hadn't gotten people to Route 7 in time, or he'd decided the risk of a confrontation within sight of the Morgantown city limits wasn't worth what it would cost him. Or he was smart enough to know the drive was already as good as delivered. She didn't let herself believe that third one. She let herself believe the first 2. They hit Route 7 at 1:23 a.m. 2 dark SUVs sat on the shoulder with their lights off. Federal plates, the specific unremarkable quality of government vehicles trying not to be government vehicles, which made them immediately identifiable to anyone who knew what to look for. As the truck slowed, one of the SUVs flashed its lights once. Ethan pulled alongside. The window of the SUV came down. The man looking at her from the driver's seat was mid-40s, compact, with the kind of face that had been patient for a very long time and had gotten good at it. He had a federal badge clipped to his jacket and eyes that moved across the truck's interior in the quick professional sweep she recognized. "Agent Webb," Ethan said. "Cross." Webb's gaze moved to Elena. "Miss Brooks, you have the evidence?" She pulled the waterproof sleeve from her jacket's interior pocket and held it up. Webb looked at it. Something in his face shifted. Not dramatically, just the specific way a face shifts when something it has been waiting a long time for finally becomes visible and real. "Follow us in," he said. "Stay close. We'll take you straight to the field office. We have a secure intake suite and a forensic examiner ready to verify the drive tonight." He paused. "Tonight, Ms. Brooks. We don't wait until morning." "I know," she said. In the back seat, Maya made a small sound and shifted. Jax adjusted automatically, redistributing her weight to remain against the child without waking her. Webb's window went up. The SUV moved. Ethan followed. Elena held the sleeve in her hand for a moment longer. The small, flat shape of it, the weight that wasn't quite weight, 47 files and 81 deaths, and Sophie's voice saying she was the toughest person she'd ever met. "I'm sorry. I should have moved faster. I'm getting there, Sophie. I'm here." And then she tucked it back against her ribs, against her heartbeat, and kept it there for the rest of the drive. They reached the federal field office at 1:47 a.m. The lights inside were already on. Webb held the door. Elena walked through it. And behind her, Ethan Cross paused for just a moment at the entrance. One hand on the doorframe, the posture of a man who has been calculating the exit from every room he's entered for a decade and a half, and is experiencing the unfamiliar sensation of choosing, for once, to stay inside, before he followed her in and let the door close behind him. The federal field office at 2 in the morning had the specific quality of a place that never fully slept. Fluorescent lights at 3/4 brightness, the hum of servers behind closed doors, a smell of old coffee and recycled air that Elena associated with every government facility she'd ever set foot in, regardless of branch or purpose. A young agent with a badge she didn't catch led them through a badge access corridor to a room that was labeled Secure Intake on a placard that someone had taped slightly crooked and never fixed. The room had a table, 6 chairs, a wall-mounted monitor, and a forensic workstation in the corner that looked newer than everything else in the building combined. A woman in her 30s with close-cropped hair and latex gloves already on was seated at the workstation. She didn't look up when they came in. "That's Agent Tran," Webb said. "She's been waiting on this longer than any of us." Tran glanced over her shoulder. "Drive?" Elena reached into her jacket and placed the waterproof sleeve on the table. Tran crossed the room, picked it up with both gloved hands, examined the seal, and carried it back to the workstation. Her movements were precise and unhurried in the way of someone who understood that rushing forensic intake was how evidence got challenged in court. 47 files, Elena said. "The folder structure is—" "I'll map it myself," Tran said, not unkindly. "If you describe the structure to me now, it creates a chain of custody question. Let me find it cold." Elena closed her mouth. "Fair point." She sat down. Webb took the chair across from her. He folded his hands on the table in the manner of someone who had run a great many debriefs and understood
that the first thing you did was let the other person settle.
Ethan remained standing near the door, not blocking it, just near it. Old positioning habit that Elena suspected he'd stopped noticing years ago. All right, Webb said, from the beginning, not the evidence. I'll get to that. I want your account of Victor Kane's operation from your direct observation. What you saw, when you saw it, what your sister told you, and when. He produced a digital recorder, set it on the table. Everything you say in this room is protected under federal whistleblower statute. You have that in writing if you want it. My assistant will have the paperwork in here in 10 minutes. I don't need the paperwork tonight, Elena said. Let's just move. Webb nodded, turned on the recorder. She talked for 40 minutes. She was a good witness. She knew it and didn't take particular pride in it. It was just a function of her training. Chronological, specific, no editorializing. Dates where she had them, approximations where she didn't, and clear distinctions between what she'd observed directly, what Sophie had told her, and what she'd inferred. Webb interrupted twice, once to clarify a timeline, once to ask for a name she'd referred to by title rather than identity. Otherwise, he listened the way he'd clearly spent years learning to listen, without expression, taking notes in a shorthand she couldn't read from across the table. When she finished, the room was quiet for a moment. Then Webb said, Donna Marsh. Elena looked at him. She called our tip line 14 months ago, Webb said. Anonymous. She described irregularities in child welfare complaint filings, patterns suggesting complaints were being generated on demand rather than from legitimate concerns. We couldn't verify it without a local source. We didn't have one. He paused. She called again 6 weeks ago, still anonymous. She said someone in the county system was preparing to use the complaint mechanism against a specific target. She didn't name you, but the description was clear enough. He looked at her steadily. She's been feeding us information at considerable personal risk for over a year, Ms. Brooks. I want you to know that. Elena absorbed that. Donna Marsh and her flowers at Sophie's funeral, and the things she'd said on the phone tonight that might have been, I'm sorry. She'll need protection, Elena said. She'll get it. He glanced at his notes. Now, Sophie Brooks. He said the name with care, not the clinical efficiency he'd used for everything else. Your sister made contact with our tip line 22 months ago. We established a secure communication channel. She was the source we lost. He set down his pen. We did not handle that well. She told us she was concerned she'd been identified, and we advised her to go dark for 60 days while we assessed our own potential exposure. She went dark. He paused. She was dead within 3 weeks of going dark. We didn't know until the following month. The room held that for a moment. You're telling me this because I should know, Elena said. Not because you're asking forgiveness. Yes, he said. Okay. Her voice was flat. Not cold, just flat, the way it got when she was processing something she couldn't afford to feel in full right now. Then let's make sure it counted for something. From the workstation in the corner, Tron said, I'm in. They both turned. Tron had the drive mounted and the folder structure open on her monitor. She was scrolling through it with the fast, analytical movement of someone who spent her days reading financial documentation and had developed a fluency for it the way other people developed fluency for language. How long for verification? Webb asked. The financial records, 2 hours to cross-reference against what we already have. The audio files. Tran paused, opened one, listened for 10 seconds, closed it. These are clear. No processing artifacts, no compression issues. They'll stand up. She looked over her shoulder. The overdose correlation data is the piece that makes this a criminal case rather than a regulatory one. If it matches what we have from the pharmaceutical supply chain investigation. How long? Webb said again. 4 hours. Maybe 3 if the formatting is compatible. Webb checked his watch. It's 2:10. We could have verification by 6. And a warrant application before a judge by noon, Elena said. By 10, if I push the paperwork tonight, and the AUSA is willing to do an early review. He looked at her. She will be. She's been waiting on this case for 8 months. Ethan spoke from near the door, the first time he'd said anything since they sat down. What about Kane's response window? He knows she left. He knows she didn't come back. He's going to assume the worst from his perspective. Webb turned to him. You think he moves on Blackstone Falls before we do? He doesn't need to move on the town. He needs to move evidence. If he has documentation of his own that he's been careful about, the next 6 hours are his window to destroy it. Ethan's voice was even, analytical. He won't know what's on the drive or what's already been verified from your end. But he's smart enough to know the drive existed and to know that if it reached federal hands, it contains the financial documentation. He'll burn the accounting records first. We have his accounting records, Tron said from the corner without looking up. Copies. Obtained through a separate warrant 6 months ago from his financial institution. The originals can burn. Ethan nodded once. The assessment absorbed, filed, discarded as a concern. What about Deputy Harlow? Elena said. His name is on those audio files. If Kane contacts him tonight, Harlow's phone has been on a federal monitor for 4 months, Webb said. Any call from Kane to Harlow gets flagged automatically and triggers a notification to my team. He glanced at his own phone on the table, face up, screen dark. Nothing yet. Kane might be smarter than to call directly. He might be. But men who've operated without consequence for 3 years tend to underestimate how much infrastructure can be built around them while they're not paying attention. Webb said it without satisfaction. Just fact. He thinks he owns this county. He's not wrong about the county. He miscalculated on the federal appetite. They put Maya in a second room down the hall, a small conference room with a couch and better lighting and a field agent named Reyes, who had apparently been selected for this assignment, partly because she had a daughter Maya's approximate age and knew how to talk to a child who'd been awake at 2 a.m. in a federal building without making it stranger than it already was. Jax went with Maya. Elena checked in twice in the first hour and found Maya the second time. Sound asleep on the couch with Jax on the floor beside her, and Reyes in the corner chair doing paperwork, and Captain tucked against Maya's chest. The bear was lighter now, she noticed, without the drive inside it. She stood in the doorway for a moment, and then went back to the intake room. What? At 4:15 a.m., Tran pushed back from the workstation and turned around. She had the look of someone who had been building a case in their head for the last 2 hours, and had just finished the structure and found it sound. It matches, she said. Webb sat forward. All of it? The financial records correlate with what we have from the bank subpoenas to a 94% confidence level. The discrepancy is in 2 accounts that we didn't have visibility on. Those are new. They extend the asset picture significantly. She pulled off her gloves. The overdose data is the part I didn't expect. She looked at Elena directly. Your sister built a statistical model that's better than what our own public health consultants produced. The fentanyl concentration correlation is airtight. We can prove the contamination was deliberate, that Kane's distribution chain knew the lethal concentration threshold, and that they crossed it in at least 6 separate distribution cycles. She paused. 63 deaths minimum, as your sister documented. Our data suggests the actual number may be higher. We have records she didn't have access to. The room was quiet. 63, Elena said. At minimum. Tran's voice was professional but not indifferent. I'm sorry. I know one of them is your sister. Elena looked at the table, the particular clean surface of a government table that had never had a water ring on it. What does this do to the warrant application? She asked. It upgrades the charge profile substantially, Webb said. He was already on his laptop typing. We were looking at trafficking, conspiracy, RICO predicate offenses, with the intentional contamination. Evidence we're adding. Knowing distribution of a lethal controlled substance, that's a separate charge category with a different sentencing structure. He didn't look up. Kane is looking at federal time that makes anything his lawyers have prepared for irrelevant. How long before the raids? Webb looked up. I'm going to call the AUSA right now. 4 a.m. She's going to love me. He said it dryly, already reaching for his phone. If she can do the warrant application pre-dawn, I want to have federal agents at staging positions in Blackstone Falls by first light. He stood. Cross. Ethan looked at him. I know what you did for 14 years, and I know your clearance is technically still active during the reserve period. I want you in the planning room when I brief my team in. He checked his watch. 90 minutes. He didn't frame it as a question. Ethan said, I'll need coffee. There's a machine in the hall that produces something that resembles it. Webb left. Tran went back to her workstation, transferring files. Elena was alone at the table for the first time in hours, and the quiet hit her in a way the noise hadn't, the specific quality of silence that arrived after sustained high alert.
and made itself known through the sudden awareness of how tired her body actually was. She pressed both palms flat on the table. 63 deaths.
The contamination was deliberate. Kane knew. The documentation proved it. Sophie had known all of this. Had carried it for over a year while someone watched her apartment and noted her movements and ultimately decided she was more manageable as a statistic than as a witness. Elena sat with that for 30 seconds. She gave herself 30 seconds, and then she stood up.
Asi.
The planning room was 3 doors down and larger, with a wall display that showed a satellite map of Blackstone Falls, and the kind of resolution that made Elena feel briefly strange about every assumption she'd ever had about privacy. Webb's team filed in over the next 20 minutes, 6 agents she didn't know, 2 she recognized from the hallway, and a woman introduced as AUSA Garland who was in her 50s and wearing a blazer over what was clearly a sleep shirt and who had the expression of someone who had been awake since Webb's 4 a.m. call and had transitioned from annoyed to galvanized somewhere on the drive over. Garland had reviewed the drive documentation in transit. She'd apparently read fast. "The warrant application is drafted," she said before Webb had finished introductions. "I'm filing at 7 a.m. when the duty judge comes on. Based on the evidence package, I expect approval within 2 hours." She looked around the room. "I want simultaneous execution. Every target location hit within a 4-minute window to prevent communication between sites." One of the agents, Kellerman, the lead on the Blackstone Falls surveillance team, pulled up the satellite map on the wall display. "We have 11 identified target locations. Primary, Kane's residence, the warehouse district on the East End, 3 commercial fronts, and the county sheriff's administrative office." He clicked through overlays. "Secondary, 6 residential addresses tied to known associates, including Deputy Harlow." Elena looked at the map. She'd lived in that town for over a year, and the satellite view made it look different. Flattened, geometrical, the streets she walked every day reduced to lines on a grid. The diner was visible. Her building on Creston Road. The hardware store below. The church parking lot they'd cut through last night. "There are civilians in several of those commercial locations," she said. "Early morning workers. The diner opens at 5:30. Patty herself is usually there by 5. Kellerman looked at her. "You're Ms. Brooks?" "Yes." He looked at Webb. "She's a material witness and a subject matter expert on the town layout," Webb said. "Let her talk." Kellerman turned back to her, the specific look of a man recalibrating. "What do you want to tell us?" "The diner. If your people go in the front at first light, you'll have Patty and 2 prep cooks and probably a delivery driver from the produce supplier who comes at 6 on Wednesdays. Today is Wednesday." She looked at the map. "The warehouse district. The east entrance has a loading dock that Kane's people use as an informal checkpoint. Anyone approaching from the east will be visible from that dock at 300 meters. You want to come from the north access road." Kellerman pulled up a second overlay. "Here? 50 meters north of that. There's a tree break that gives you visual concealment to about 60 meters of the dock." He made a note. "How do you know the north access road?" "I drove produce deliveries for a wholesaler my first month in town before I got the diner job." She looked at him. "I paid attention." He nodded slowly. Looked at Webb again with an expression that had finished recalibrating and arrived at something like respect. "What else?" Kellerman said. She spent the next 30 minutes going through the map. Not everything. She didn't have operational knowledge of every location, but the commercial district she knew, the residential streets she knew, and the county offices she'd been inside enough times during Maya's guardianship process to know the layout in the way you knew places you'd been frightened in. She described the loading dock checkpoint, the secondary entrance to Kane's primary residence through what appeared on the map to be a private road, and 2 locations she'd noticed in 14 months that hadn't appeared on the federal map as associated properties, but that she'd seen Kane's people use consistently enough to flag. Both of them were added to the target list. When she sat down, the room had the quality of a space that has had something introduced into it and is adjusting to the new weight distribution. Kellerman was updating the operation overlay. 3 other agents were on phones. Garland was reviewing the warrant draft on a tablet. Ethan was standing beside her. She hadn't noticed him move from the other side of the room. "You just planned most of a federal raid on a county crime operation," he said quietly. "I watched them do route planning in Kandahar for 18 months, she said. "It's the same geometry." "It's exactly the same geometry." He looked at the wall display. They didn't have that North Access Road approach. That matters. I know. Webb came back into the room with 2 cups from the hallway machine that did indeed produce something resembling coffee. He handed one to Elena, one to Ethan. Garland's filing at 7, he said. I expect the warrant by 9. Staging is at 8 a.m. regardless. We brief on site. He looked at Elena. You and Maya stay here until it's executed. I don't want you in Blackstone Falls during the operation. I know. I'm serious about that. I know, she said again, with enough weight in it that he heard it and moved on. By 6:30, the field office had the specific contained energy of a machine running at operational tempo. People moving with purpose. Nobody running. Nobody raising their voice. The particular discipline of a team that had been building toward a moment for long enough to know that urgency and panic were different things and that only one of them was useful. Elena sat in the hallway outside the planning room with a cup of bad coffee and watched it happen. At some point, Maya appeared at the end of the hall, led by Reyes, Jax walking at the child's side. Maya had been given a DEA hoodie that came to her knees and which she wore with the particular 7-year-old's unbothered ownership of clothing far too large for her. She spotted Elena and walked the length of the hallway and sat down beside her on the bench without saying anything, and pressed against Elena's side, and Elena put her arm around her and they sat like that while the operation moved around them. Is it almost done? Maya asked. Getting there. Will we go home after? Elena thought about the apartment on Creston Road, the lock she checked 3 times every morning, the window latch that stuck, the photograph of Sophie that was currently in her bag. We'll go home, she said. It might look a little different. Maya absorbed this. She pulled Captain from the front pocket of the overlarge hoodie and held him by the arm. Captain feels lighter, she said. Elena looked at the bear. He is a little, she said. Maya turned the bear over in her hands, examining it with the patient thoroughness of a child who noticed things. She found the restitched seam. Elena had closed it last night as neatly as she could before they left the apartment, and pressed her thumb against it. She didn't say anything. She just held the bear and pressed against Elena's side. Your mom hid something important in there, Elena said quietly. A long time ago, to keep it safe. A long silence. Is it safe now? Maya asked. Elena looked down the hallway where Webb was briefing 2 agents, where Tran was transferring verified files to the AUSA's case management system, where the operational machine was moving toward the moment Sophie had tried to reach and hadn't. It's safe now, she said. Maya leaned her head against Elena's shoulder. Jack settled at their feet, chin on her forepaws, eyes at half-mast. At 7:02 a.m., Garland filed the warrant application. At 9:17, it was approved. Webb came out of the planning room with his jacket on and his credentials visible and the look of a man who had been waiting 22 months for this morning and was not going to waste a second of it. We're going, he said. Then he stopped and looked at Elena. This goes as planned, and it will. Victor Kane will be in federal custody before noon. He held her gaze. Your sister's name will be in the federal case record as the primary whistleblower. Officially. On the record. That's not a favor. That's what she earned. Elena stood up. Her legs were tired. Her eyes felt like they'd been open for a week. Bring him in, she said. Webb nodded once. He turned and walked toward the exit, and his team fell in behind him with the quiet cohesion of people who had done this before and knew the weight of what they were walking toward. The door opened. Morning light came through it. Actual dawn light, pale and clean, the kind that arrived before the sun fully committed. For a moment, the whole corridor was filled with it. Then the door swung shut and the light was gone, and the field office hummed on in its careful, perpetual way. Elena sat back down. Maya was asleep again, head against her shoulder, Captain in her lap, Jax motionless at their feet. Elena held very still so she wouldn't wake her. Outside, 40 miles away, Blackstone Falls was beginning its morning. Patty was unlocking the diner. The construction workers were pulling into the parking lot on Route 9. The retired men were making their way toward the corner booth they'd occupied since before any of this began. And Victor Kane, wherever he'd spent the night, was moving through whatever version of mourning a man moved through when he believed, still, that silence was something he could own. He had, Elena calculated, approximately 2 hours left to believe that. She closed her eyes and listened to Maya breathe and waited for the world to change. She woke when Maya shifted. Not a gradual surfacing.
She came up fast and alert the way she always did, the way 14 months of sleeping with one ear toward the door had trained her, hand moving toward a threat that wasn't there before her eyes were fully open. The bench, the hallway, the field office. Reyes was still in the chair at the end of the corridor, now on her third or fourth cup of coffee by the look of her, and the building had the particular mid-morning quality of a place running on skeleton crew because the operational team was elsewhere. Elena checked her phone. 10:43 a.m. 3 texts from Webb, sent at intervals. The first at 9:52. Staging complete. All units in position. The second at 10:08. Executing. The third 6 minutes ago, at 10:37. Kane in custody. Harlow in custody. East warehouse secure. No shots fired. Call when you're up. She read it 3 times. Maya was watching her from beside the bench, fully awake, Jax at her feet, Captain in her hands. The child had learned to read Elena's face the way you learn to read weather. Not the dramatic signals, the subtle ones. She was reading her now. Is it over? Maya asked. Elena looked at the third text again. Kane in custody. Yes, she said. It's over. Maya looked at Captain. She turned the bear over once in her hands, slowly, the way she had in the hallway last night when she'd found the restitched seam. Then she held it against her chest and closed her eyes for one moment. Not long, just a breath. And when she opened them again, something in her face had changed in a way Elena couldn't precisely name, like a frequency that had been running just below audible had finally stopped.
Can we call Donna Marsh? Maya said. Elena stared at her. You know Donna Marsh? She used to bring food to Mom's office sometimes. Maya looked at her levelly. She was nice. Elena thought about Donna's flowers at Sophie's funeral, her voice on the phone last night, careful, encoded, and scared. The 14 months of anonymous tip line calls at considerable personal risk. Yeah, Elena said. We can call Donna. Webb arrived back at the field office at 11:50. He came in with the specific contained energy of someone who had just executed something that had taken 2 years to build and was still in the process of understanding that it had worked. His jacket was dusty at the shoulder. She didn't ask. And he had a scratch on the back of his right hand that was already dried and which he apparently hadn't noticed. He sat down across from Elena in the intake room, which had been cleared of the overnight's materials and now had the slightly anticlimactic quality of a stage after the performance. 11 arrests, he said. Victor Kane, Deputy Aaron Harlow, 2 county council members, the assistant county building inspector, Kane's distribution manager, 4 known associates with outstanding federal warrants, and the county medical examiner. He said the last name with a particular flatness. The medical examiner is the one that'll matter to you. His testimony about Sophie, Elena said. His original findings were falsified. We have documentation from your sister's files and from a parallel record we obtained through the State Medical Board's database. The manner of death ruling on Sophie Brooks will be formally vacated. The case will be reclassified as a homicide. He held her gaze. Kane ordered it. We have communications that establish that. The prosecution will establish it further. The room was very quiet. Homicide, Elena said. Not an overdose. Not a bad choice. Not another forgotten statistic in a county that had learned to keep its numbers tidy. A crime with a perpetrator and a victim and a legal record that called it what it was. Homicide, Webb confirmed. Sophie Brooks will be designated a federal whistleblower posthumously, which carries specific legal recognition and protection of her professional record. Her documentation will be cited in the federal case as primary evidence. He paused. She built a better case than we did with a fraction of the resources and most of the risk. That goes on the record. Elena put both hands flat on the table. She looked at them. The scar on her left index finger from a field surgery in Kunar province, where the light had been bad and the patient hadn't survived anyway. The callus on her right palm from the diner job, the knuckle she'd cracked in high school, and that had never quite healed straight. I need a minute, she said. Take whatever you need. She didn't take very long. 2 minutes, maybe 3. Sitting with her hands flat on the table and her eyes on the wall, and whatever moved through her in those minutes, she kept private. Then she straightened up. What happens next, procedurally? Webb understood the shift and matched it without comment. Kane's arraignment will be in federal court, not county. We've already filed for federal jurisdiction. Given the charge profile and the evidence package, His legal team will attempt a continuance while they assess the documentation, but the weight of it makes bail unlikely. The case goes to the U.S. Attorney's Office, and it will take, he made a measured face, probably 18 months to reach trial. These cases take time. I know they do. But the machine is running, he said. It doesn't stop. She nodded. Donna Marsh. Already in a federal protection protocol as of 2 hours ago. Voluntary. She requested it herself, which took some courage given that she'd spent 14 months maintaining plausible deniability. He permitted himself something close to a smile. She also brought her cat, which our protection detail was unprepared for, but is managing. Elena thought about that for a moment. Then she laughed. Not a big laugh, not a performed one, just the short, surprise kind that happened when something genuinely struck you as funny against the backdrop of everything that wasn't. Webb looked slightly startled. Then his own face moved. The cat's name is apparently Victor, he said. She named it before all this. Of course she did, Elena said. Oh. They returned to Blackstone Falls at 2 in the afternoon in a federal vehicle with Reyes driving and Jax occupying the full back seat beside Maya, who had spent the drive in a state of wide-eyed window watching that Elena hadn't seen from her since before Sophie died. The child pressed her nose to the glass as they came down from the mountain pass, and the town resolved below them in the afternoon light. It looked smaller than Elena expected. Places always did, she'd noticed, when the thing that had been making them large was taken out of them. Blackstone Falls without Victor Kane's gravity was just a small Appalachian town with too many closed storefronts and cracked sidewalks and old photographs on diner walls. Just a place that had been having a very bad few years and was now, possibly, on the other side of them. Reyes pulled onto Main Street. The first thing Elena noticed was the people. Not gathered, nothing so organized, but they were out in a way they usually weren't at 2 on a Wednesday afternoon, standing in doorways. On the sidewalk in front of the hardware store, 2 women she recognized from the diner's regular crowd standing in the parking lot of the pharmacy, talking with an animation she'd never seen from either of them before. The owner of the shuttered furniture store, a man she knew only as Gerald, 60s, who had not opened his front door on the street side in over a year, was sitting on his front stoop in the afternoon sun with a cup of something warm, watching the federal vehicle pass with an expression she couldn't quite read. Patty was on the diner steps. As the vehicle slowed near the corner, Patty caught Elena's eye through the window. The older woman, 62, bad knees, 30 years behind the same counter, raised one hand, palm out. Not a wave. Something more deliberate than a wave. An acknowledgement. Elena raised her hand back. The apartment on Creston Road was exactly as they'd left it the night before, which was itself a strange thing. The suspension of time that happened to a place where life was interrupted mid-sentence. 2 coffee mugs in the drying rack. The kitchen table with its water ring and its scratch. The photograph of Sophie back in Elena's bag, not yet returned to the refrigerator. Maya went straight to her room. Elena stood in the kitchen doorway and listened to the sounds of the child moving around in the familiar space. The specific sound of Maya's feet on the floor. The sound of her small backpack dropped in its corner. The quiet that followed, which was a comfortable quiet. A settling-in quiet. Not the silence of a child going small with fear. Elena walked to the kitchen window. The street below was empty. No dark sedan. No engine idling at the curb. No men in the front seat studying their phones. Just Creston Road in the October afternoon, leaves coming down from the trees on the far side. A dog she didn't recognize trotting purposefully along the sidewalk. The hardware store sign swaying slightly in a wind she couldn't feel from inside. She stood there for a while. When she heard the knock, 3, pause, 2. She crossed the apartment and opened the door. Ethan Cross was in the hallway with Jax at his heel and a paper bag from the diner in his hand that smelled like coffee and something warm. He'd changed, clean shirt, the same operational jacket, and there was a quality about him that was different from last night, not dramatically, but present. Some tension that had been in him since she'd met him had either resolved or shifted into something different. Webb sends his official thanks, he said. He also says the forensic team found 2 additional accounts your sister didn't know about that added another $8 million to the asset seizure, which he thought you'd want to know. I do want to know that. She stepped back. Come in. He came in. Jax went immediately toward Maya's room. From down the hall came Maya's voice. "Jax!" And the sound of the dog's nails on the floor as she picked up speed, and the thump of 90 pounds of German Shepherd arriving at a 7-year-old's bed with full commitment to the reunion, despite having been separated for approximately 4 hours. Elena and Ethan sat at the kitchen table with the coffee he'd brought, which was better than the federal office's machine, and still not good, and which was fine. "Where are you going?" she said. After this, he turned his cup. "I was going to drive to Clarksburg, visit Daniel's grave. I've been meaning to for 4 months. You haven't been?" I kept not being ready. He said it without flinching, which was its own kind of courage. "I think I'm ready now." She nodded. Outside, the October afternoon was doing what October afternoons did in the mountains, cooling fast, the light going golden, and then amber, the shadows long. "Come back," she said. He looked at her. "After Clarksburg." She kept her voice level, which took an effort she chose not to examine. "Maya needs someone to run Jax with, and I could use—" She paused. "I could use someone around who knows what to do with silence." He was quiet for a moment. "That's a specific thing to ask for," he said. "I'm a specific kind of tired." He turned his mug once more, set it down. "I'll be back in 3 days," he said. "Okay." "I'm not—" He stopped, tried again. "I don't know how to do this well, whatever this is." "Neither do I." She looked at him across the table. "I haven't done anything well in about 14 months. I got Maya to school and checked the locks and worked the shifts, and that was basically it." She paused. 3 days is fine. We're not going anywhere." He looked at the table. The water ring. She watched him register it the way she'd registered it 100 times. "I should fix that table," he said. "Probably." "The floorboard in the hall, too, the one that creaks." "Yes." "I noticed 2 loose steps on the exterior stairs on the way up." "Ethan." He looked at her. 3 days, she said. The corner of his mouth moved. Not quite a smile. In the vicinity. 3 days, he said. He left an hour later. Maya stood at the top of the stairs with Jax and watched the truck until it turned off Creston Road and disappeared. And then she looked at Elena with the particular expression she used when she was processing something she didn't quite have words for yet. "He's coming back," Elena said. Maya considered this. "How do you know?" "Because he said he would. And he's the kind of person who does what he says he's going to do." Maya thought about that. Then she looked at Jax, who had sat down between them and was watching the empty street with the meditative patience of a dog who understood that people left and returned, and that the appropriate response to both was the same attentive calm. "Like Mom," Maya said quietly. Elena looked down at her. "Mom always came back," Maya said, "until she didn't." The stair landing was cold. The wind had come up in the last hour, the mountain cold that moved ahead of sunset in October, and Elena pulled Maya against her side with one arm. "Sophie always came back," Elena said, "and what she left behind, everything she worked for, it came back too, just differently." Maya was quiet. She had her hand in Jax's fur, fingers working slowly through the thick black saddle marking. "I know Captain is lighter," she said, "because the thing Mom put in him is gone now." Elena looked at her niece. "Does that bother you?" Elena asked. Maya thought about it with the serious deliberateness she brought to real questions. "No," she said finally. "I think it's better. It got where it was supposed to go." She paused. "Captain can just be Captain now." Elena held her closer, didn't say anything. Sometimes there was nothing to say because a 7-year-old had just said the exact right thing, and any addition would only reduce it. The weeks that followed were not clean. Elena had been in enough operational aftermaths to know that they never were. The adrenaline dropped, and then you felt everything you hadn't been able to feel during, and it arrived in no particular order and without regard for your schedule. She had 3 nights in the first week where she couldn't sleep past 3 a.m. and lay staring at the ceiling of her bedroom, working through the inventory of every decision she'd made in 14 months, and finding things to critique in most of them. She cried once, on a Tuesday afternoon in the narrow corridor behind the industrial dishwasher at the diner, and then she washed her face and went back out and took a table's order, and that was that. Maya had her own version of it. The nightmares changed, not stopped, changed. Less shapeless fear, more specific content that she could sometimes describe in the morning, which her school counselor said was actually progress, the brain processing rather than avoiding. Elena sat on the edge of the mattress on the bad nights and did what she'd always done: touch, stillness, presence. The federal case moved with the deliberate inexorability of federal machinery, slow, grinding, and ultimately unstoppable. Kane's lawyers filed motions. The motions were denied. The evidence package from Sophie's drive was entered into the case record under her name, formally, as primary whistleblower documentation. Elena received a letter from the U.S. Attorney's Office confirming the designation, and she read it twice and put it carefully in the drawer where she kept important documents, and didn't read it again for a while because she wasn't ready to. Donna Marsh came back to Blackstone Falls after 2 weeks in federal protection. She brought her cat Victor, who turned out to be enormous and deeply unpleasant to strangers, and she went back to her intake desk at the Social Services Office, which was now under a federal oversight structure that made the previous arrangements functionally impossible. She called Elena on a Thursday evening, and they talked for an hour about nothing particularly important and everything that mattered. And when the call ended, Elena sat at the kitchen table in the October night and looked at the water ring and felt something shift in her chest by a degree. The diner changed too. Not formally, not all at once. But in the weeks after the arrests, the construction workers who'd always eaten in the careful silence of people not wanting to attract attention started talking over their tables again, the decibel level rising incrementally. The retired men in the corner booth began to finish their sentences. A young woman Elena didn't know came in and asked Patty if there was a community bulletin board because she wanted to post information about reopening a small business downtown. And Patty pointed at the wall and said that the space next to the old photographs had been empty for too long. Gerald from the furniture store came in one morning and had coffee at the counter and said, to nobody in particular, "I've been thinking about reopening." And 2 of the construction workers at the nearest table looked up, and one of them said, "I'll help you move things back in if you need the labor." And Gerald sat for a moment with his coffee cup, clearly not prepared for that response, and said, "All right then, Saturday." Elena heard all of this from 3 tables away and kept moving and didn't let herself stop, because if she stopped, she'd have to account for the feeling in her throat, and she had 4 more tables to cover. Ethan came back on day 3, as stated. He fixed the creaking floorboard in the hall. It required taking up a section of the subfloor and shimming a joist, which took 2 hours and created a mess he cleaned up afterward. He fixed the exterior stairs over the following weekend. The kitchen table he refinished on a Sunday afternoon while Maya sat across from him drawing and occasionally offering opinions on the sanding technique that he incorporated without comment, and by the evening the table was unrecognizable from what it had been. He didn't move in. It was more gradual and less defined than that, which suited them both. He had a room at a motor lodge on Route 9 for 3 weeks. Then he didn't. Then his duffel appeared in the corner of the front room, and nobody formally acknowledged this. He cooked dinner on the evenings Elena worked late. He ran Jack's every morning at 6, and Maya started coming with them in the second week. And Elena stood at the kitchen window with her coffee and watched the 2 of them and the dog at the end of Creston Road, just visible in the morning light, and felt the unfamiliar texture of something she hadn't experienced in so long she almost didn't recognize it. Ordinary. The moment was ordinary, and it was exactly what it looked like, and nothing terrible was happening inside it. She turned away from the window before they came back, because she didn't want Ethan to catch her standing there watching, and then she laughed at herself privately for that, because there was something almost teenage about it, and she poured a second cup of coffee and set it on the counter for him. Webb came through Blackstone Falls in late November, on his way to a case in Charleston that he described without detail. He stopped at the diner and had coffee and eggs, and told Elena that the first wave of plea negotiations had begun in the Kane case and that the assistant sheriff had flipped, which put the prosecution in a position of significant strength for trial. "How long?" Elena asked. "Trial starts in April. Based on the evidence and the cooperating witnesses, the prosecution expects a full conviction on all primary counts." He drank his coffee. "Kane's lawyers are still trying to negotiate. The U.S. attorney isn't interested." "In Sophie's case?" "Formally reclassified as homicide, as I said. The case against Kane on that count is part of the federal prosecution. Conspiracy to commit murder, essentially. It runs alongside the trafficking charges." He looked at her. She'll get justice. It takes time, but it's happening. Elena refilled his coffee without being asked. There's something else, Webb said. He set his cup down. I want to ask you something, and you can say no. She looked at him. There are 3 other towns in this region where we're tracking similar patterns. Similar structures, local power, compromised officials. Someone inside who's scared and doesn't know how to get information to the right place. He paused. We have the federal mechanism. We don't always have someone who knows how to talk to people in those communities, who understands what they're scared of and why, who can help us understand the human architecture of a place before we go in. He turned his coffee cup. That's a specific skill. You have it. The diner was doing its mid-morning thing around them, the comfortable noise of a room full of people who'd stopped being afraid of being in the same room together. I have a job, Elena said. I know. And a kid. I know. He waited. I'm not asking for an answer today. I'm asking you to think about it. Elena looked at the counter. At the coffee maker she could operate in her sleep. At the order pad she'd never needed because she kept it in her head. At the worn section of linoleum where she'd stood for about 12,000 hours over 14 months. I'll think about it, she said. And she meant it. On a Saturday in December, the diner closed early for the first time in 4 years. It wasn't a death, it was a renegotiation. Patty had been talking about it since the arrest, talking about what the space could be when it wasn't just a place people came out of necessity and left quickly. She'd knocked out a wall section between the dining area and the back room, let the light through, pushed some tables together to make a larger gathering space. She'd taken down 2 of the old photographs and replaced them at eye level, more visible, a deliberate act. The town as it had been, restored to a place of honor rather than mourning. That evening, she opened the doors and people came. Not a party, exactly. More like the town exhaling. People who'd spent 3 years finding reasons not to be in the same space at the same time, simply being in the same space at the same time, and finding that the air was fine. The mechanic whose garage had burned came and stood near the window for a while before anyone noticed him, and then Gerald walked over and shook his hand, and that was that. 2 nurses from the nearest hospital who'd transferred away 18 months ago had driven back and sat in a booth near the door with the somewhat dazed look of people who'd expected to feel more like strangers and didn't. Elena worked the room with coffee because it gave her hands something to do. Old habit. It probably always would be. At one point she was standing near the wall with the photographs, refilling a cup, and she became aware of Maya beside her. The child had been orbiting the room all evening with Jax, receiving attention from approximately everyone and bearing it with the patient dignity of a child who had learned that adults needed to offer kindness sometimes, and that accepting it gracefully was its own form of generosity. Maya was looking at the photographs on the wall. Is that what it used to look like? She asked. Elena looked. The summer festival photograph, 500 people, the square full, everyone looking toward whatever was happening outside the frame. Yes, she said. Maya looked at it for a while. It looks like tonight, she said. Elena looked at the room, the tables pushed together, the mechanic and Gerald, the 2 nurses. Patty behind the counter with her bad knees and her 30 years and her expression of someone who has held something together through force of will for long enough that she'd forgotten it was possible to do otherwise, now slowly remembering. The construction workers at a table with the retired men from the corner booth, a combination that had never existed before and seemed, somehow, entirely natural. Ethan near the window with his coffee, not talking much, present the way he was always present, complete and without performance, watching the room with the quiet attention of someone who had decided that this particular room was worth watching. Maya was right. It looked like the photograph. Not identical. Nothing was ever identical, and the people in the room carried what the last few years had cost them in ways that didn't disappear because one morning in October the federal machinery had finally arrived. But underneath that, the same impulse, the same basic human instinct toward each other that fear could suppress but apparently couldn't destroy entirely, given enough time and enough silence finally broken. Ethan looked over and caught her eye. She lifted her coffee pot slightly. A question. He shook his head. Still good. She nodded back. That was all. It was enough. In April, Victor Kane was convicted on all primary federal counts. The sentencing came in June, 47 years without parole.
The number had a brutal arithmetic to it. The judge had made that arithmetic visible in his statement, had named the 63 dead by count without naming them individually, and had noted that the sentence was intended to reflect the weight of each one. Elena heard the news from Webb via text during a Wednesday lunch rush. She read it standing in the corridor behind the industrial dishwasher, the same spot she'd cried in once in November. She stood there for a moment, then she put her phone in her apron pocket and went back out and took the next table's order and kept moving. Later, when the shift was over and Maya was at school and Ethan was wherever he went. In the mornings when Jax ran on her own in the backyard, Elena went to her room and opened the drawer where she kept important documents. She took out the letter from the U.S. Attorney's Office, the one that designated Sophie Brooks as a federal whistleblower, the one she'd put away before she was ready to look at it. She read it all the way through this time. Then she took the photograph of Sophie from the frame on her nightstand. Sophie at age 25, Maya on her lap, both of them laughing at something outside the frame, the world still in front of them. She sat on the edge of her bed with the letter in one hand and the photograph in the other and stayed there for a while. She didn't say anything to the photograph. She'd never been the type to talk to photographs. Sophie had known her well enough to know that. But she held it until she heard Maya come in the front door, home from school, calling her name through the apartment, and Jax's nails on the floor going to meet her, and Ethan's voice from the kitchen saying, "She's in there, give her a minute." And the fact that he knew to say that he'd read the day correctly from 40 feet away, hit her somewhere she hadn't quite been prepared for. She put the photograph down. She set the letter on top of it. She got up. Maya was in the hallway when she opened the door, hovering with the particular energy of a child who is trying to give space while also very much wanting to not give space. Her backpack was on, her shoes were still on, and she was holding Captain by the arm in the loose, almost forgotten way of a child who no longer needed to grip a thing to feel safe from it. "Hi," Maya said. "Hi, baby. Are you okay?" Elena looked at her niece, at the dark eyes that saw too much and had earned the right to see it, at the 7-year-old who had learned that adults had limited bandwidth and who had been managing hers carefully and at enormous cost for a very long time and who deserved, at minimum, an honest answer. "Yeah," Elena said, "I really am." Maya studied her for a moment with the serious, unfiltered assessment of someone who had learned that the word fine was a door and not an answer. Then she nodded. She believed it. "Ethan's making dinner," she said. "He's not sure what he's doing." "I heard that," Ethan said from the kitchen. "It's true," Maya called back. Elena laughed. The real kind, the unplanned kind, the kind that arrived on its own without being coaxed. She stepped into the hallway and put her arm around Maya's shoulders, and they walked toward the kitchen together. And behind them the bedroom door swung softly shut on the letter and the photograph, and the 14 months that had led to this exact ordinary evening, and ahead of them the smell of something overambitious on the stove and Jax underfoot, and a table that had been refinished on a Sunday afternoon and no longer had a water ring on it. The locks on the front door still got checked every morning, but Elena had started checking them only once. The ones who stay when everyone else walks away. They're not the ones without fear. They're the ones who looked at the cost and paid it anyway, because some things are worth more than being safe.